2006 Toyota Matrix, the exhaust manifold is leaking. I'm Brian Eslick from How To Automotive, and I'm going to walk you through that process of changing it. To get to a couple of the bolts, you're definitely going to need to get the car in the air. If you have a rack, rack it up. If you're doing this at home, I recommend jacking it up as high as you can using floor jacks and jack stands. You're going to have to crawl under there. We're going to get started by removing the top engine cover, just removing the bolt here, and then on the back they have some press-on clips. So go ahead and remove those and pull the cover off and set aside. After that, what we're going to do is we need to remove this heat shield in the back so we can get to the bolts that come from here. So, and we're also going to disconnect the oxygen sensor wire and go ahead and disconnect it here. And then do that, and then go ahead and remove the 12mm bolts holding the shields on, and take that off and take the upper shield off. One of the tips I wanted to give you is before you start taking all the bolts out of it, is spray everything down, all the bolts down with penetrating oil. We here at the shop like to use PB Blaster, but WD-40 or any of those type of brands, Liquid Wrench is another brand. Go ahead and give it all the bolts a spray down before you do it, and it'll make life a lot easier. Okay, now that you got the shield off, you can take the O2 sensor off now if you're comfortable doing it, or you can wait until you get the manifold out and put it on in a vise and take it out. So these are the bolts I was talking about. You're gonna have to get to from underneath. But for right now, what we're gonna focus on is right here underneath the manifold. There's gonna be a couple 12s. I think there's 5 of them. So there's gonna be one here, one in the middle, one here, and then one on the end. So we're going to remove all of those, the bolts, and if you don't have penetrating oil on those, put some penetrating oil on that, and go ahead and get these bolts down here soaking, and your oxygen sensor. So start by, if you want to, you can remove this now. And so after we get it all unbolted, it's going to come up towards the valve cover and come out the top. So go ahead and unbolt all that. So I went ahead and removed the oxygen sensor. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you is a lot of times the oxygen sensors, the threads can pull or gum up and they don't want to come out. It's pretty common on removing oxygen sensors. And if that happens to you, I have a video showing you how to remove stuck oxygen sensors, and I'll put a link in the description for you if you're interested in looking at that. So I got the 5 bolts off the manifold here, the oxygen sensor out. Now we're going to lift the car up, and there's also another, it's kind of hard to see, but right underneath here is a support bracket. You will be able to see it from underneath. So we're going to lift it up, and now we're going to remove the support bracket bolts and the bolts that are holding the cat onto the manifold. Now that I got all the bolts out, I'm just going to grab the exhaust manifold, the cat here, and give it a pull backwards and dislodge it from the seal on the manifold. And I'm going to lower the vehicle down. Okay, now that I got all the bolts out and it's disconnected, I'm just going to pull it out like that and then lift it straight out of the car. Now that I got the manifold out of the car, I can see it's cracked on the back right there where the weld is. So now what we need to do is pull off our old gasket and wipe down our cylinder head and check it for if it needs to be any cleaning, and clean it up as we need it, and then put the new gasket on, and then we'll put the new gasket on the tail of the manifold here, and then we'll slip it back down into place, and we'll slide it over the studs and start the bolts. We'll start all 5 of them, but we'll leave it loose. I like to start all the bolts all the way around, including the support brackets. And then once I get that done, all mounted up and secure, then I'll torque the manifold down, then I'll torque the tail piece down, and then I'll torque the bracket down. So now that the new manifold's in, I got all the 12mm bolts just started and just loose, and so that way you have a little bit of play. And now I'm going to lift the car back up and start the rest of the bolts. So Toyota uses bolts that have these springs on it for the rear ones down here. And to get them started, it can be a little tricky. So what I had to use is a pair of pliers like so, and reach up from behind and squeeze it together on one side, and then I was able to start the bolt on the other side and then pull it in just a little bit couple threads. And now with it started with a couple threads on this side, you should be able to get to the opposite side and start the threads. So once you get that started, then you can just remount your bracket. Okay, now that we got all of our bolts started, our bracket started underneath, you're gonna torque the 12mm bolts, the 5 bolts that hold the manifold on, torque these down to 27 foot-pounds. And then on the bottom ones down there, you're just gonna, they have these, with the spring one, they have this little shoulder, and that's just gonna tighten up until that shoulder bottoms out into the manifold, and that's it. And then you just tighten it down so there's no torque spec for it. And then after that, you just tighten the support brackets underneath. And after you get all that done, you're gonna put your oxygen sensor back in and torque that down and plug it back in, or not plug it back in yet. Then you're gonna put the heat shield on and tighten, and then put the bolts back in on the heat shields, tighten that down, and then plug your oxygen sensor back in. So when you torque these manifold bolts down, you wanna start with the middle bolt first, and then work like to the one over here, and then crisscross over here, and then crisscross back over to the one side, and crisscross. So start from the middle and work your way out in a crisscross pattern when you tighten them. Now that your engine cover's all secured, give it a start and check for leaks, and that's pretty much how you complete the exhaust manifold replacement on a 2006 Toyota Matrix. It's got the 1.8 liter engine in it, and I'm Brian Eslick from How To Automotive. And as always, it's my pleasure sharing my experience with you guys. And I'd like to thank you for watching, and remind you to subscribe.